A heavy, humid silence pressed against the Grand Chamber in Washington, D.C., as if the very air was holding its breath. Rows of politicians, aides, and international observers sat shoulder to shoulder, their attention fixed on the marble dais beneath a dome that had witnessed centuries of debate and just as much silence. All eyes turned to her. Congresswoman Emily Carter stepped forward, her heels tapping sharply across the polished floor. In a tailored navy suit and a stare that could slice glass, she looked every bit the Southern firebrand her state had come to love, and the world had learned to fear. Behind her, aides shuffled index cards, while Ambassador Richard Caldwell leaned over and whispered to his assistant, "Play it cool, but hit them hard." The mic clicked. Carter paused, and then she spoke. "I'm tired of these so-called African leaders lecturing us about democracy." A murmur spread, half cough, half protest. But she didn't flinch. Her eyes narrowed. Her voice dropped half an octave. "Your place is Africa. Stay there." 6 words. That's all it took. For a moment, the chamber froze. No movement. No noisy. Just the sharp sting of her sentence echoing off the carved stone walls. Then, everything unraveled. Phones flew up. Record buttons blinked red. Journalists bolted from their seats. In the press gallery, a New York Times reporter dropped her pen. The BBC's lead correspondent mouthed a stunned wow as the chamber dissolved into whispers, gasps, and the rustle of breaking news. Outside, within minutes, the digital world erupted. Hashtags ignited. Your place is Africa trended globally in under 30 minutes. Tweets were flying faster than the congressional Wi-Fi could handle. Some were outraged. Others were stunned. All were watching. Across the ocean, the golden sun dipped low over Ouagadougou, casting long shadows over red clay streets. In his office, President Ibrahim Traoré stood silently by a window, the light hitting his face like a spotlight carved from history itself. He had not spoken yet. He didn't need to. The world was already listening. Back in D.C., Carter exited the chamber with the cool confidence of someone who believed she had just said what needed to be said. Reporters chased her with questions, but she offered no clarification, only a raised chin and a swift walk toward the elevators. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Ambassador Caldwell's face was pale. His team had spent months crafting a narrative of cooperation, trade, and modern diplomacy. And in a single moment, that story shattered like glass dropped on marble. In London, CNN cut into regular programming to broadcast a live panel. In Lagos, DJs paused Afrobeats to replay Carter's words. In Accra, university students were already printing protest banners. One simply read, "We have always had a place." The world wasn't just reacting. It was responding with unity, with pride, with power. What began as a routine hearing in a crowded Capitol chamber had become something far more, the spark to a movement of memory, of dignity, of reckoning. And in those first breathless minutes, before any official reply had come from Burkina Faso, one thing was already clear. This was no longer just about 6 words. It was about what the world heard in the silence after them. 30 minutes. That's all it took. In less time than it takes to brew a fresh pot of coffee, 6 words spoken inside a chamber in Washington had set the digital world ablaze. Your place is Africa. The phrase hit timelines like a meteor. At first, disbelief. Then, fury. And finally movement. On Twitter, the hashtag number #YourPlaceIsAfrica surged past sports, celebrity gossip, even global stock alerts. CNN's red breaking news banner blinked across screens in airports, bars, classrooms. The phrase looped on television like a siren. But it wasn't just noise. It was ignition. In Nairobi, a group of students stood huddled under a banyan tree, refreshing their phones. One held up the clip. She said it. She actually said it. Around him, shoulders squared, eyes sharpened. Someone grabbed a marker and began writing on cardboard, "My place is power." In Lagos, on a sweltering sidewalk beneath a flickering street lamp, a young mechanic paused his socket wrench mid-repair. He turned up the radio and listened in silence as Carter's voice replayed. Then he whispered to no one in particular, "Tell her, we're not waiting anymore." In the newsroom of CNN's London bureau, policy editor Sarah Thompson pushed aside her notes and faced the camera. Her voice was calm, but there was something pulsing beneath it. "Tonight," she said, "6 words have electrified a planet. But this is not mere outrage, it's a reckoning." Her inbox exploded in real time. A tweet from Johannesburg, "We are not your projects. We are your equals." A video from Accra, a university professor, hands trembling, holding up a sign, "We have always had a place." From Dakar to Detroit, Cape Town to Chicago, screens lit up with commentary, protest, pride. But beneath it all ran something deeper: clarity. At the United Nations headquarters in New York, Deputy Ambassador John Reynolds sat in silence, watching the wave break across continents. He glanced at the emergency folder marked "Response Strategy." It was already obsolete. Meanwhile, in a back room at the State Department, advisors updated press points every 90 minutes. They tried everything, reframing Carter's comments as personal opinion, redirecting attention to development aid, emphasizing long-standing partnerships. But every talking point fell like paper in the wind, because the world wasn't looking for spin. It was listening for truth. In coffee shops in Atlanta, professors rewound Carter's quote, dissecting every word. "That wasn't a slip," said one scholar. "That was a worldview." Across from her, a retired teacher folded her arms and muttered, "She told a continent to sit down." Back in Ouagadougou, dusk painted the rooftops in streaks of amber and blood orange. Taxi radios crackled with fragments of Carter's speech. Vendors whispered to one another over folded linen. Mothers held their children a little closer. A woman in a mustard yellow headscarf pulled her daughter aside and asked softly, "Did you hear what she said to our president?" Her daughter nodded slowly, and the mother answered herself, with something like fire in her voice, "Then they're about to hear from us." In that moment, across oceans and time zones, the insult no longer belonged to one man. It had become a mirror held up to every citizen who'd ever been told their place was outside the room. And around the world, people responded the only way they knew how: by stepping in. This wasn't outrage for the sake of rage. It wasn't noise for the cameras. It was memory. It was identity. And it was rising, because the truth was undeniable now. The place the world had tried to erase was no longer willing to be silent. In the heart of Ouagadougou, far from the firestorm of screens and headlines, The presidential palace stood in heavy silence. Late afternoon light filtered through high windows, casting golden streaks across cool marble floors. The air inside was still too still. Outside, the city pulsed with anticipation. But within these walls, time felt like it had paused. Holding its breath, President Ibrahim Traoré sat alone at his desk. No cameras, no advisors, just a man, and the weight of a world waiting for his voice. Papers lay untouched before him, draft statements, bullet points, diplomatic suggestions hurriedly written by aides. None of them moved him. Not yet. Instead, his fingers traced the worn spine of a book, Collected Speeches of Thomas Sankara. Its page, dog-eared and faded, had followed him through dusty barracks and sleepless nights. Now, it sat before him again, quiet, firm, familiar. Across the room, a soft knock broke the stillness. It was Amadou Kone, his chief of staff, always composed, always precise. He entered carefully, holding a thick folder, bulging with translated headlines, viral tweets, and urgent press requests. "Mr. President," he said gently, voice lowered as if not to disturb the gravity of the moment. "Every network is waiting. They want your response." Traoré didn't turn. He kept his eyes on the horizon. Just beyond the window, where the rooftops of Ouagadougou glowed beneath the last slant of sun, dust hung in the air like memory. He said nothing. Amadou set the folder down. Between them, a stack of voices, please. Fury. Hope, all waiting to be channeled into a reply. And still, silence. "Un moment later." Jamila entered the room. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She simply stood by her husband's side. A quiet figure in deep indigo and ochre, her dress mirroring the tones of earth and sky. She placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. Her presence, more than words, was what grounded him. She had walked beside him through the years of doubt, through corridors filled with whispers from abroad, through cold stares and clenched smiles from foreign dignitaries. Through it all, she had held her ground. Now, she offered that strength again without demand, without condition. "Dignity," she finally said, her voice soft but steady, "is earned by silence first, then by truth." Traoré closed the book gently. He reached for a second volume, Nelson Mandela's memoir, and opened to a marked page. He read quietly, his eyes scanning words that spoke of patience forged in fire, of power shaped by purpose. Outside, the call to evening prayer echoed faintly through the open window. The sounds of the city honking taxis, the rumble of market carts, the laughter of children floated upward and wrapped around him like a living reminder. This wasn't just about responding. This was about defining. He picked up a pen. Slowly, deliberately, he began to write, not with anger, but with clarity. Each stroke cut across the page like a blade of light in the dark. "Yesterday, I was told my place is Africa." He paused, let the sentence breathe, then underlined it. "My place," he wrote, "is Africa, the cradle of humanity, the heart of resilience, the future of innovation." The words came not from fury, but from something far deeper. Conviction. Amadou watched silently. Jamila's hand never left his shoulder, and as the twilight deepened, President Ibrahim Traoré lifted his pen once more, preparing the words that would not just answer a moment, but awaken a movement. Because this silence wasn't weakness. It was precision. It was power. It was the inhale before history exhales. The room felt carved out of time. Outside, Ouagadougou exhaled into twilight. City lights blinked on, one by one, like stars slowly reclaiming the night sky. Inside the presidential office, the silence had turned sacred, dense, deliberate, unbreakable. President Ibrahim Traoré sat hunched over his desk, his brow furrowed in focused calm. Around him lay a constellation of open books, Mandela's memoir, Sankara speeches, essays on decolonization and African Renaissance. The scent of aged paper and jasmine from the palace garden hung in the air like memory. But he wasn't reading anymore. He was writing. Each line he put to paper carried the weight of history and the burden of the present. This wasn't a press release. It wasn't a tweet. It was a response to a wound felt across oceans, a silence broken with thought, not rage. Yesterday I was told my place is Africa. He wrote again. Then beneath it, and so I reply, my place is Africa. And Africa is not a weakness. It is a force. His pen didn't race. It moved like a sculptor's hand, shaping each word with purpose. He paused, reread, crossed out a phrase, rewrote it. Better, clearer, stronger. Across the desk, Amadou Kone remained still. The chief of staff said nothing, just watched as the president crafted the answer. No one else could write. Not a politician's reply. A statesman's truth. Behind them, Jamila lit a single lamp. Its glow washed over the mahogany table, casting long shadows on the wall behind them, shadows that danced like the ancestors listening in. She approached silently and placed a folder beside him, translations of reactions from across the world, comments from Ghana, emails from Chicago, footage from Dakar. None of it broke his rhythm. He had already seen enough. He wasn't writing to the press. He was writing to the people. The children who had never heard their leaders speak with pride. The elders who thought dignity had long been buried under debt and diplomacy. The millions who had read Carter's words and wondered if silence would speak for them again. It wouldn't. He turned the page. They say, we must wait for guidance, for aid, for permission. But we no longer wait. We act. The words pulsed on the page like a heartbeat finally heard. Jamila stood behind him now, her hand resting on his back. Not urging, just anchoring. Traoré picked up the sheet, reading it aloud in a low, even voice. His cadence was calm, but each syllable carried weight. The kind that lingers in rooms long after the speaker leaves. Dignity, he murmured, is not gifted. It is claimed. He folded the paper once, clean and sharp, as if sealing something sacred. Amadou stepped forward. No nods, no praise, just quiet understanding. He took the letter from the president's hands, like receiving a torch. I'll prepare the broadcast, he said softly. Traoré didn't move. He looked out the window once more, where the rooftops of Ouagadougou shimmered under moonlight. From mosques, the call to prayer rose. From street corners, conversations hummed. From balconies, radios played fragments of CNN commentary and African talk shows alike. He closed his eyes. He saw the students in Nairobi, the vendors in Lagos, the mothers in Accra. He saw them all, and he knew this wasn't about reclaiming pride. It was about never losing it again. When he opened his eyes, his voice was steady. Final. Let the world hear it. Because some answers aren't shouted. They're written. And they endure. The press room in Ouagadougou trembled not with noise, but with tension. A hush, electric and taut, swept across rows of journalists. The wooden podium stood alone under a cone of golden light. Cameras blinked red. Microphones buzzed, catching every cough, every shuffle, every held breath. They had come from across the globe, from London, from Johannesburg, from Washington. Each reporter had the same question. What will he say? President Ibrahim Traoré entered without fanfare. No applause, no escort, just a man in a dark suit, walking with the quiet gravity of someone who carried more than a title, someone who carried a continent's breath on his shoulders. He paused at the podium, adjusted the mic, and then he began. Yesterday, he said, I was told my place is Africa. The words landed like a stone in still water. A ripple ran through the room, some eyes narrowed. Some teared. All leaned forward. His gaze swept the crowd. Calm, unshaken. Yes, he continued, voice steady. My place is Africa, the land that cradled the first humans, the land whose empires traded gold, while others still lived in mud. The land where wisdom was written when the world thought we could not read. A few gasps. A few pens paused mid-scratch. He pressed on. Remember Mansa Musa, whose pilgrimage humbled kings. Remember Timbuktu, where scholars penned truths in ink before others knew the alphabet. Remember Mandela, who forgave when the world expected revenge. Remember Wangari Maathai, who planted trees as if they were shields. Every name was a thunderclap. Every sentence cracked the ceiling of perception. My place is Africa, he repeated, voice rising now, not in anger, but in affirmation. And Africa is not a weakness. Africa is a force. The words slammed into the silence like a drumbeat from the earth itself. A camera lens trembled. A journalist lowered his pen. Even the air seemed to shift. We've been told to wait. For permission. For funding. For validation. But today he leaned in. We no longer wait. We act. It was a declaration. A rupture. A rewriting of narrative in real time. In the back of the room, a seasoned reporter from The Guardian swallowed hard. He'd covered revolutions. He'd never heard a room this quiet. On the left, Sarah from Al Jazeera wiped her lens. Her eyes shimmered. President Traoré paused, letting the silence expand around him like a flag. Then he softened. This is not about rage, he said. It's not even about revenge. It's about truth. It's about dignity not demanded, but demonstrated. He looked past the crowd beyond them. Africa speaks today. Not to beg, not to plead, but to remind the world of what it has always refused to see. We were never missing. You just chose not to look. A few reporters stood, quietly. No one told them to, because something was happening. History was speaking not from a screen, but from a soul. President Traoré's final words came not as a shout, but a calm promise. We are done asking for a seat. We are building our own table. He stepped back, folded the speech in half, nodded once, and walked away. No hand raised. No fist clenched. Just a man who had said exactly what needed to be said. Behind him, the room erupted not with chaos, but with something deeper. Applause. Slow. Measured. Rising like thunder. The world would never forget what it had just heard. Because sometimes, the most powerful revolutions begin with nothing more than truth spoken clearly and without fear. The echoes of President Traoré's speech didn't stop at the walls of the press room. They didn't pause for analysis. They didn't wait for spin. They moved like wind. In Ouagadougou, as dusk turned to night, lanterns swayed gently above wooden tables where vendors closed shop and families gathered. The words, "We no longer wait, we act," floated through the air on radios. In whispers, on the backs of memory, at a small cafe tucked between two shuttered bookstores, a barista reached for her milk pitcher and paused. Then, slowly, she traced 4 words into the foam of a cappuccino. "My place is Africa." A group of young entrepreneurs sat nearby, hunched over blueprints lit by a single bulb. But they weren't talking about balance sheets or investors. They were talking about roads, about clean water, about solar farms and new tech startups. The fire in their voices didn't come from funding. It came from pride. Down the street, a teenage girl clutched her mother's hand, still repeating the president's words under her breath like a prayer. Africa is not a weakness. It is a force. In Lagos, a mechanic leaned against the hood of a half-repaired car, grease still on his hands. A customer showed him a video on his phone Traoré's speech. The mechanic watched the clip in silence, then nodded once and said, "That's our leader." In Johannesburg, street artists began sketching murals before the sun rose again. One wall bore the face of Traoré, surrounded by swirling patterns of Sankara, Mandela, and Wangari Maathai. Above them, in bold red letters, "We are not missing. You just refuse to look." Across the Atlantic, in Atlanta, Tom Bennett's cafe buzzed with unfamiliar energy. The usual regulars, school teachers, students, retirees leaned in around the television, mounted above the counter. It wasn't playing sports. It was playing history. Dr. Amara Johnson, live from Emory University, was breaking down Traoré's speech with the precision of a surgeon and the heart of a daughter of the diaspora. "This wasn't just a speech," she said, her voice calm but glowing with conviction. "It was a mirror held to the world. And this time, the world couldn't look away." A woman by the window dabbed her eyes. A student at the bar whispered, "This changes everything." Tom turned down the volume and cleared his throat. "She's right," he said. "This isn't a moment. It's a shift, halfway across the world." In Paris, professors rewrote their syllabi. In London, tube riders watched the speech subtitled on their phones. In Toronto, activists printed flyers with Traoré's quote and handed them out at subway entrances. Even in New York, inside the UN press corridor, a journalist from Brazil turned to her French colleague and said, "That wasn't a reply. That was a reckoning." Back in Ouagadougou, families sat around battery-powered radios. A mother, her head wrapped in deep crimson cloth, turned to her sons and daughters. "You see," she said softly, "this is what a voice sounds like when it remembers who it is." In a classroom just outside the capital, A young boy took a piece of chalk and scribbled on the board before the teacher arrived. We act now. Around the world, people weren't just watching anymore. They were moving. They were rising. Because something rare had happened, a leader hadn't told them to follow. He had reminded them they already belonged. Night settled over Ouagadougou like a velvet curtain. Soft and certain, the city shimmered not with noise, but with something deeper. A quiet pride. A steady pulse. The kind that doesn't explode, it endures. On the palace balcony, President Ibrahim Traoré stood beside his 9-year-old daughter. Her small hand curled into his warm, curious, strong. Below them, the lights of the city glowed like stars that had fallen just low enough to say, "We're still here." She looked up at him. "Did you change the world?" "Papa." He smiled. Not wide. Just enough. Enough to show her the answer was too big for one sentence. Then he knelt beside her and whispered, "We didn't change it by shouting. We changed it by standing." And that was the truth. They hadn't fought fire with fire. They had answered insult with identity, mockery with memory, dismissal with dignity, across oceans and languages. His words had become more than a speech. They had become a seed, planted in classrooms, on murals, in lullabies. It was growing in the way people walked, spoke, believed. And around the world, people who had once felt erased were writing themselves back in. From barbershops in Chicago to taxis in Nairobi, the refrain echoed, "We no longer wait. We act." Not in rage, but in purpose. Traoré looked out across the rooftops. Somewhere, a radio played his speech over the hum of generators. Somewhere, a mother was explaining to her children what it meant to be unshaken. Somewhere, a father was standing taller, simply because someone reminded him he could. He rose, kissed his daughter's forehead, and whispered, "Your place is wherever you decide to build it." And in that moment, beneath a dome of African stars, one truth was undeniable. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it walks quietly through the night. And when it does, the world listens.